He said I was too old to live alone, then moved his new bride into my home like I was already gone. They redecorated, erased my memories, laughed when I asked where my things went, treated me like I was in the way. I didn't argue. I didn't beg, but I wrote everything down. And when their big day came, I was already 10 steps ahead. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. It's a quiet sickness, this kind of cruelty, the kind that festers in families behind closed doors where no one sees. Your support can shine a light. Now let me tell you what really happened. I was folding towels, the afternoon sun slanting through the kitchen window, warming my hands. It was a Thursday laundry day, a simple rhythm in a life I'd built carefully, piece by piece like the quilt on my bed. That's when he called me. My son Marcus. I hadn't heard that particular shaky tone in his voice, that thin wire of desperation, since he was a gangly teenager of 15, back when he came home with a busted lip, a torn shirt, and a note from the principal about a fight behind the bleachers. "Ma," he said, his voice crackling a bit like he was calling from a long way off, though I knew he was just across town. "Ma, I need somewhere to crash. Just for a little while. The divorce, it's official now." My heart did a little squeeze. Divorce. A harsh word for the unraveling of a life he'd tried to build with a woman I'd never quite warmed to, though I'd smiled and baked my best pound cake for her bridal shower. I told him yes before the words were fully out of his mouth, before he could even stumble through an explanation I didn't need. "Of course, baby. You come on home. That's what mothers do. We open the door. We always open the door. Even when we see the storm clouds gathering behind our children." He showed up that evening, just as dusk was settling like a soft, gray blanket over the neighborhood. 2 duffel bags, looking worn and overstuffed, were dropped with a thud by the doorway. His shoulders were slumped, and the defeated look in his eyes was a punch to my gut. He looked older than his 38 years, tired down to the bone. He mumbled something about staying in a cheap motel near the highway for the past week, the kind with flickering neon signs and a lingering smell of stale cigarettes and regret. I believed him. The faint scent of it clung to his clothes. I didn't ask questions. Not then. Instead I bustled. I made him a tall glass of sweet tea, the way he liked it, with extra lemon, the ice clinking a cheerful sound in the sudden quiet of his arrival. I went to the linen closet and pulled out the good sheets, the soft, lavender-scented ones for the guest room bed. His old room. Then I headed to the kitchen, my mind already running through the ingredients for his favorite meal. Smothered pork chops, slow-cooked with a rich gravy and plenty of sweet Vidalia onions, served over a mound of fluffy white rice. Comfort food. Soul food. The kind of meal that was supposed to heal. He barely touched it, pushing the food around his plate with his fork. "Just tired, Ma," he'd said, his voice flat. "Really tired." He'd retreated to the guest room early, the door clicking shut with a soft finality. Thought, give him time. Grief has its own schedule. Heartbreak too. For the first few weeks, an uneasy sort of calm settled over my condo. It was almost like having a teenager in the house again, but a quieter, more somber version. Marcus was helpful in his own way. He'd carry in the heavy bags of groceries from the car without being asked, his brow furrowed in concentration as if the task required all his focus. He fixed the leaky kitchen faucet that had been dripping for weeks, a small, competent act that made my heart feel a little lighter. He even mowed the small patch of lawn out back, the whir of the mower a surprisingly comforting sound on a Saturday morning. One Sunday he surprised me by putting on a clean shirt and coming with me to early service at Greater Hope Baptist. That alone shocked half the congregation into stunned silence, then a flurry of hushed whispers and knowing nods. He just told Pastor Evans and the ever-curious Sister Agnes that he was just regrouping for a bit, looking for something more long-term in terms of living arrangements. I stood beside him, patting his arm, and I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Every mother wants to believe her child will find his way back to solid ground. Then came Kenya. Her arrival wasn't announced with trumpets or even a polite knock. It was subtle at first, insidious like a vine creeping through a garden. A whisper of change. A silk scarf, a vibrant fuchsia I'd never own, appeared draped over the bathroom hook one morning, its expensive perfume clashing with my familiar ivory soap. An extra toothbrush, sleek and black, materialized in the holder next to mine. A tube of cherry red lip gloss, the sticky kind, showed up nestled amongst my sterling silver spoons in the cutlery drawer, a jarring splash of color in my orderly kitchen. Small things. Intrusions. I asked Marcus about it one evening, trying to keep my tone light, casual. He just grinned, a sheepish, boyish grin that reminded me so much of him at 10, caught sneaking cookies before dinner. "Oh, that's Kenya," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "She's someone new. Someone special." I didn't want to mention anything, till I knew it was serious, you know? Serious? How serious could it be if I, his mother, whose roof he was under, was the last to know? A week later, Kenya was in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning, scrambling eggs in my cast iron skillet, wearing my favorite quilted house slippers, the ones with the arch support. She hadn't asked. She just appeared, moving with an easy confidence that set my teeth on edge. I tried to be gracious. Lord knows I tried. I offered her coffee, smiled until my cheeks ached. Kenya was, by any standard, a beautiful woman. Light-skinned, with a cascade of dark, glossy hair that always looked freshly styled. Her makeup was flawless, even at 8 in the morning, and she dressed like she was perpetually on her way to a photo shoot or a meeting with a magazine editor. Polished. But there was something about her eyes, a cool, appraising glint that was as cold as a January wind. Calculating. She didn't say thank you for the coffee, just took the mug with a little hum. Didn't ask if she could use my stove, my eggs, my butter. Just moved through my space like she belonged there more than I did. Like she was assessing it and me and finding us both wanting. The real shift, the one that made the floor beneath my feet feel unsteady, happened about a month after Marcus moved in. I came home from my Wednesday book club meeting. We were discussing a lovely novel about a woman rediscovering herself after loss, and I walked into my living room to find it alien. My antique quilt, the one my grandmother had stitched by hand, its faded blues and creams telling a story of generations, was gone from the back of the sofa. The big, comfortable armchair, the one I'd nursed Marcus in, the one I'd read countless bedtime stories in, the one where my late husband, Charles, used to sit and read the paper every Sunday, it had been replaced. In its place was a stiff, unwelcoming velvet thing in a garish shade of teal, with no discernible back support and spindly gold legs. There were gold-accented throw pillows everywhere, shedding glitter that caught the light. Glitter. My living room. My sanctuary. What happened in here? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I stood frozen in the doorway, my book club tote bag slipping from my suddenly numb fingers. Kenya, lounging on the new velvet monstrosity, sipped wine from one of my good crystal glasses, the ones I saved for special occasions. She didn't even look up at first. "Oh, hey Odessa," she said, as if I were a casual acquaintance who dropped by unexpectedly. "We're just freshening it up a bit. Felt so old in here. Dated, you know. Old. Dated. Like me, I supposed." I turned to Marcus, who was hovering near the hallway, refusing to meet my eyes. He was fiddling with a loose thread on his t-shirt, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "Marcus," I said, my voice quiet but firm, the quiet that comes before a storm. "This is my home. My furniture." He rubbed the back of his neck, that telltale sign of his discomfort. "Come on, Ma. Don't be like that. You always said you wanted to pass the place down to me someday anyway. We're just, you know, making it more livable. For the future." His future, apparently. Not mine. That was the first crack. A hairline fracture, but it ran deep. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed, staring at the slow, hypnotic rotation of the ceiling fan, its blades slicing through the heavy silence of my room. I thought about all the things this small condo had seen. Marcus's first steps taken right there in the hallway. Countless birthday parties, the air filled with the scent of cake and the sound of children's laughter. Church potlucks, my dining table groaning under the weight of fried chicken, macaroni and cheese, and collard greens. The quiet, agonizing days after my Charles passed, when friends filled this space with their love and their casseroles. This wasn't just a collection of rooms and furniture. It was a repository of my life. It was mine. And suddenly, inexplicably, I was being treated like a guest in it. An unwelcome guest. I didn't say anything for a while after that. What was there to say that they would hear? I bit my tongue when Kenya burned the cornbread for dinner, filling my kitchen with acrid smoke, and then blamed my ancient oven. I kept quiet when I overheard her on the phone with one of her friends, her voice dripping with condescension. Oh, she's harmless, really. Just a little bitter and bored, you know how old folks get. I stayed silent, my hands clenched into fists under the table, even when she picked up my arthritis gloves from the side table, held them up with 2 fingers like they were something distasteful, and laughed. What are these medieval torture devices? She tittered to Marcus, who just offered a weak, uncomfortable smile. But silence, I was learning, has its limits. It can curdle into something hard and unyielding if you're not careful. 2 weeks later, the dam of my silence finally broke. Kenya threw a Saturday brunch. In my condo. I wasn't asked. I wasn't consulted. I certainly wasn't invited. I'd had a restless night and woke late, the sounds from the living area muffled through my closed bedroom door. I came out of my room around noon, needing to use the bathroom, and found my home transformed into a bustling cafe. Strangers, Kenya's friends, a gaggle of young women in bright dresses and too loud laughter were everywhere. They were in my kitchen, drinking mimosas from my champagne flutes, picking at a fruit platter arranged on my good china. They were snapping selfies on my floral couch, the one Kenya hadn't yet managed to replace. Kenya herself, resplendent in a silk jumpsuit, looked at me with a flicker of annoyance, as if I were the one who didn't belong, an inconvenient interruption to her party. "Oh, hey Miss Odessa," she said, her voice overly bright, waving a dismissive hand in my direction as if I were the hired housekeeping staff. "You okay? Need anything?" I looked at Marcus. He was leaning against the kitchen counter, a mimosa in his hand, looking thoroughly out of his depth. He gave me this sheepish, apologetic shrug and mouthed, "Later. Later." It was always later with Marcus. I turned, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest, went back to my room and locked the door. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely turn the key. This wasn't just disrespect anymore. This was erasure. That night, after the last of Kenya's guests had finally departed, leaving behind a mess of sticky glasses and spilled secrets, I called Renee. Renee Claiborne and I had been friends since before Marcus was a twinkle in his daddy's eye. We'd met at a church bake sale, bonded over a shared love for sweet potato pie and a healthy disdain for lukewarm coffee. She was a real estate attorney now, one of the best in the city, sharp as a tack and fiercely loyal. I told her everything, the words tumbling out in a torrent of hurt and disbelief. How Marcus had never officially asked to bring Kenya to live here. How Kenya had just moved herself in bit by bit like a squatter with good luggage. How my things were disappearing or being replaced. How I felt like a ghost in my own home. Renee listened patiently, her silence a comforting presence on the other end of the line. When I finally wound down, her voice was calm, measured. "Do you still have the deed to the condo, Odessa?" she asked, her tone all business. "I think so," I said, my mind racing. "Yes, of course. It's somewhere in the filing cabinet in the spare room. The one they haven't invaded yet." "Find it," she said, her voice firm. "Tonight. And Odessa? Don't say a word to either of them about this call or about the deed. Not one word." I found it, tucked away in a faded manila folder labeled, "House Papers." My hands trembled as I unfolded the stiff document. And there it was, clear as day, Odessa Mae Johnson. My name. Only mine. Charles had insisted it be that way, "Just in case, honey," he'd said, "a woman needs her own security." Bless his foresight. A small, fierce flicker of something, hope, resolve, ignited in my chest. The following Sunday, I smiled my way through another one of Kenya's impromptu brunches. She'd invited me this time, an afterthought as she was pulling quiche from my oven. I listened as Kenya bragged to her assembled friends about her upcoming wedding to Marcus. "We're thinking a very intimate affair, blush and gold for the color scheme. Very high-end, very chic. The venue's already locked in. Just working on the guest list now." She looked right at me then, a sly, triumphant little smile playing on her lips as she said, "It's gonna be a brand new chapter for us. For us. Not for me." Later that night, after everyone had left and Marcus was picking at leftovers in the kitchen, I asked him, trying to keep my voice even, "So, Marcus, how long were you and Kenya planning to stay here?" "In my home." He didn't even look up from his plate, chewing with his mouth open, a habit I thought I'd broken him of 30 years ago. "Oh, just until after the wedding, Ma," he said casually. "You cool with that, right? Saves us a ton of money on rent. We can put it towards the honeymoon. Bora Bora, maybe." I just nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. Cool with it. I was a frozen tundra of fury on the inside. Inside, something that had been cracking for weeks finally broke off clean and sharpened itself into a weapon. The next morning, I was on the phone with Renee before the sun was fully up. I recounted the previous day's conversation. "What are my options, Renee?" I asked, my voice low but steady. Renee was silent for a moment, then I heard the smile in her voice. "Odessa, my dear friend," she said, "you've got all the power here. It's your name on that deed, and that's what matters. We'll start by giving them formal legal notice. 30 days to vacate the premises. In writing. Delivered by certified mail, return receipt requested. No room for misunderstandings." That same day, I sat down at my little writing desk in my bedroom, one of the few spaces Kenya hadn't yet freshened up, and drafted the letter. My hand was surprisingly steady. Renee, bless her efficient heart, cleaned up the legal language, made it airtight. We sent it out that afternoon. Legally served. I was on the porch, watering my ferns, when the mailman delivered it a few days later. I watched Kenya retrieve it from the mailbox, a puzzled frown on her face. I saw her tear it open, scan the contents, and then her face contorted, first in disbelief, then in derision. She laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "She's joking, right?" she called out to Marcus, who was tinkering with his car in the driveway, waving the paper like it was a particularly bad joke. "Your mom's lost her mind." Marcus walked over, took the letter, his brow furrowed in confusion as he read. He looked up at me, standing there with my watering can, a bewildered expression on his face. "Ma, what is this? What's going on?" "Just protecting my space, son," I said, my voice calm, my gaze steady, sipping the coffee I'd brought out with me. "As per the terms of that letter, you and Kenya have 30 days to find alternative accommodations." That was when the real tension, the thick, suffocating kind, began to fill my home. Kenya stopped speaking to me altogether, which frankly was a relief. She communicated through loud, pointed sighs, the slamming of cabinet doors, and dramatically exaggerated coughing fits whenever I entered a room. Marcus just moped, shuffling around the condo with the air of a man deeply wronged, occasionally shooting me wounded, pleading looks that I pointedly ignored. I pretended not to notice their silent, childish war. Instead, I started packing. Carefully. Methodically. I began with the truly sentimental things, the items that held pieces of my soul. Photo albums filled with fading pictures of chubby baby Marcus, of Charles and me on our honeymoon, of family gatherings long past. My late husband's silver cufflinks, the ones he wore on our wedding day. My mother's worn leather Bible, its pages filled with her spidery handwriting in the margins. Renee, a true angel in sensible shoes, not only provided legal counsel but also helped me find a reputable, discreet buyer for the condo. Quietly, efficiently. The closing date was set, with a touch of what I could only describe as poetic justice, for the very day of their wedding, March 11th. Meanwhile, with an arrogance that was breathtaking, Kenya continued to use my address to finalize every single detail of her precious wedding. The florist, the caterer, the rental company for the gold Chiavari chairs. All of it, all those confirmations and invoices, routed directly through this condo, my condo. It would have been almost comical if it hadn't been so infuriatingly presumptuous. The days ticked by, each one a small X on my mental calendar. They thought I was old, past my prime, a relic. They thought I was slow, easily confused, a pushover. They forgot I'd raised a difficult boy into a man, buried the love of my life with dignity, and paid off a 30-year mortgage all by myself, working 2 jobs for a good portion of it. They forgot who Odessa Mae Johnson truly was. And when that wedding day came, so too would the reckoning. I woke up one morning about a week after the notice had been delivered, to the acrid scent of industrial-strength bleach burning my nose and stinging my eyes. Kenya was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the kitchen floor with a vengeance, in my favorite pair of soft, faded pajama pants, the ones I usually saved for lazy Sunday mornings. She didn't say good morning, didn't even acknowledge my presence as I walked past her to make coffee. She just kept scrubbing, her movements aggressive, humming some grating pop song I didn't recognize, like she was exorcising demons from the linoleum of her house. I navigated around her to the coffee maker. She'd rearranged my canisters again. Sugar was now in the salt jar, coffee in the flour bin. My carefully organized spices were shoved haphazardly into one drawer, their labels peeled off or obscured. My system, honed over decades, was ruined. Annihilated. "Excuse me," I said, my voice tight, trying to reach for my favorite mug. The cheerful yellow one with a slightly chipped handle that Marcus had made for me in a second-grade pottery class. It was a small, silly thing, but it was precious to me. She looked up then, her face flushed from exertion, and flashed a smile so artificial it could have powered a small city. It was the kind of smile that people in customer service deploy when dealing with a particularly trying patron. "Oh, good morning, Odessa," she chirped. "I moved all your mugs to the lower shelf over there. I figured that'd be easier for you to reach." That was the moment. The precise, crystal-clear moment I stopped trying. Stopped hoping for a sliver of decency, a crumb of respect. She didn't mean easier. She meant older. Weaker. Fading into insignificance. Over the next week, the atmosphere in the condo grew more toxic with each passing day. It got worse, as if Kenya, sensing her time was limited, though she clearly didn't believe it truly was determined to make her mark, to obliterate any trace of me. She started bringing home shopping bags from expensive boutiques almost daily. Oversized, garish vases I never asked for, more scratchy, glitter-shedding throw pillows I hated, an ugly, ornate brass mirror with cherubs etched into the frame, which she hung directly where my cherished family photo gallery used to be. I stood before the empty space on the wall, a hollow ache in my chest. "Kenya," I asked, my voice carefully neutral, "what happened to the pictures of Marcus as a baby? The ones of my grandchildren?" She replied without looking up from her phone, where she was scrolling endlessly through some social media feed. "Oh, those? They really clashed with the vibe I'm going for in here. Too cluttered." The vibe. My life, my memories, my family reduced to clutter that clashed with her vibe. She turned my home, my sanctuary, into a sterile, impersonal hotel lobby and had the audacity to call it a vibe. When I confronted Marcus later that evening, asking him in a low, desperate voice why he wasn't standing up for me, for my memories, for our family, he just sighed, that weary, put-upon sigh that made me feel like the heaviest burden in the world. "She's just trying to make it feel more like home, Ma," he said, avoiding my gaze. "For us. More like home? For who, Marcus?" I pressed. "Because it's feeling less and less like my home every single day." He rubbed his temples, a gesture of manufactured stress. "Ma, please don't start. It's not that serious. It's just stuff. To stuff. My life. My history. To stuff." That night, I found my mother's antique sewing basket, the one with the faded silk lining and the tiny silver thimble, in the trash bin by the curb. Not even tucked away in a storage bin in the garage. The actual outdoor trash waiting for collection. I didn't say a word. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Not then. But I retrieved it, photographed it carefully, time-stamped the image, and emailed it to Renee with the subject line, Exhibit A. She called me later that night, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Odessa," she said, "you don't owe them kindness, not anymore. You've given them shelter, you've been more than patient. What they're doing now, this isn't family being family. This is an occupation. They are colonizing your life." I nodded, though she couldn't see me, tears finally rolling hot and silent down my cheeks. "I'm not even a person in this house anymore, Renee," I whispered into the phone. I'm furniture they're waiting to move out. Or throw away. "They'll regret it, Odessa," she promised, her voice hardening with a steely resolve that mirrored my own growing determination. "They will live to regret this." The 30-day notice period expired. Came and went like a forgotten birthday. They never responded in writing. They never acknowledged it beyond Kenya's initial derisive laughter. They just stayed. They laughed about it, I overheard them. They assumed it was an empty threat, a bluff from a lonely old woman. Kenya even said to Marcus one evening, her voice carrying clearly from the living room where they were watching some reality TV show at full volume, "She's not gonna do anything, babe. Where would she go? She's just scared of dying alone." That was when something inside me, something that had been slowly freezing over, hardened into a block of pure, unadulterated ice. Scared of dying alone? Oh honey, I was more scared of living like this, a prisoner in my own life. They were planning their wedding with a blithe, almost manic intensity, as if nothing else mattered, as if my eviction notice was just a figment of my senile imagination. Vendors traipsed in and out of my condo at all hours. Florists measuring windows for garland, caterers discussing menu options in my kitchen, A hyperactive wedding planner with a clipboard and a headset taking notes. Packages addressed to Ms. Kenya, last name to be Johnson, arrived daily. A mountain of boxes filled with bridal fripperies, all delivered to my doorstep. She used my address for the florist, for the hairstylist, for the tuxedo rentals, even for the officiant's contract. She's completely delusional, I heard Kenya whisper loudly to her sister on speakerphone one afternoon, while I was ostensibly napping in my room. This place is practically ours already. She's just a placeholder, a temporary inconvenience. A placeholder. I wanted to scream, to rage, to throw every single one of her tacky new possessions out onto the lawn. But instead I wrote it down. Every insult. Every dismissive gesture. Every item they moved, discarded, or repurposed. Every condescending comment. Renee had told me to keep a detailed file, a meticulous record. I kept it in a plain brown accordion folder on my nightstand, labeled simply, "When they forget who I am." It was getting thicker by the day. One afternoon I was in the living room trying to find some solace in watching a televised sermon by Bishop T.D. Jakes, when Kenya walked in. She stood directly in front of the television, blocking my view, her arms crossed, an impatient expression on her face. "So," she said, not bothering with a preamble, "just to be absolutely clear, you won't be needing the condo the weekend of the wedding, right, Odessa?" I looked up, my finger hovering over the mute button. "Excuse me. The wedding weekend," she repeated, enunciating each word as if I were hard of hearing or feeble-minded. "We'll be hosting the bridal party here for prep. You know, hair, makeup, mimosas, the whole 9 yards. I'm going to need the space. All of it." I stared at her, momentarily speechless at the sheer audacity. "And where exactly would I be going during this bridal prep?" She shrugged, a flick of her wrist as if my displacement were a matter of supreme indifference to her. "I don't know. Maybe stay with one of your church friends? Or get a nice little hotel room for a couple of nights. You'll probably be more comfortable anyway. Less chaos for you." I blinked at her slowly. "Kenya," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "this is my home." She laughed, then, a short, brittle sound. "Not for long, sweetie. Not for long." I turned off the TV. Stood up slowly, my joints protesting but my spine rigid. I walked past her, out of the living room without another word. My hands were ice cold. My heart, however, was strangely, terrifyingly calm. The calm of a battlefield general surveying the terrain before the final, decisive engagement. Renee and I met the prospective buyers 2 days later at a neutral coffee shop. They were a lovely young couple, Andre and Patrice, recently married, their eyes shining with the excitement of first-time homeownership. They were respectful, kind, and most importantly, pre-approved and ready to close immediately. Everything was handled with Renee's trademark efficiency. Legal, clean, and crystal clear. The closing date was officially, irrevocably set for March 11th, the day of Kenya and Marcus's wedding. The irony was so thick I could have spread it on toast. The initial 30 days of the notice period came and went. So they stayed, laughed, planned, ignored. Renee, true to her word, sent one final, unequivocal reminder. This one wasn't just a notice. It was a declaration. It came via courier, requiring a signature, and included a detailed, itemized list of consequences. Your personal belongings, if not removed by 9 a.m. on March 10th, will be professionally packed, removed, and stored at XYZ Secure Storage Facility, located at 123 Industrial Way. Said items will be held for a period of 60 days. Failure to retrieve your belongings within this time frame will result in their donation to a charitable organization or, where appropriate, their legal disposal. We attached copies of receipts for the prepaid storage unit. We documented everything, every communication, every ignored deadline. They signed for the package. And then they ignored it. Completely. Kenya kept parading around the condo like a queen on her coronation day, FaceTiming her friends and family, giving them virtual tours of her new place. I overheard her one afternoon, her voice bubbling with excitement as she panned her phone camera across my living room, her living room in her mind. "And this is where we'll put the custom-built wet bar after the honeymoon. I'm thinking all crystal glassware, really sleek. You know, like adult luxury vibes." I stood in the darkened hallway, unseen, a silent witness to my own erasure, and wrote down every single arrogant word in my little brown folder. The next morning I made a series of calls. I scheduled a deep cleaning service for the 10th. Then a locksmith for the 11th, post-closing. Then a reputable moving crew also for the 10th. I started sleeping with the file folder beside me on the nightstand like a talisman. Marcus, lost in his own world of pre-wedding jitters and Kenya's endless demands, didn't even notice when I carefully packed away my late husband's collection of jazz records, or when I tenderly removed the old, framed family portraits from the hallway wall, leaving pale rectangles on the wallpaper. They were too busy playing house in a home that was built on a lie. Let them. I was done warning. I was done hoping for a last-minute miracle of conscience. The game was over. I was just waiting for the final whistle. And soon, on the very day they planned to toast to forever, they would learn in the most public and unforgettable way what a real mother does when her love is mistaken for weakness and her home for a doormat. The first morning of March arrived like a hesitant whisper, a faint promise of spring after a long, hard winter. I stood by my bedroom window, sipping my lukewarm tea, watching as the pale dawn light spilled over the skeletal branches of the old oak tree behind the condo complex. 30 days, and then some, had passed since my formal letter had been delivered, signed for, and subsequently ignored. No response. No acknowledgement. Not even a grudging attempt to discuss the situation. Kenya was already up. I could hear her in the living room, her voice unnaturally loud and cheerful as she talked on the phone to her sister, presumably discussing last-minute flower arrangements or some other vital wedding detail. I watched her from the relative shadows of my kitchen doorway. She'd certainly made herself comfortable. Too comfortable. Her bare feet were propped up on my mahogany coffee table. The one Charles had refinished himself, her phone on speaker, and she was laughing that high-pitched, attention-grabbing laugh as if this were her sorority house and I, a mildly annoying invisible roommate. I noted, with a fresh surge of irritation, the new box of oversized, ostentatious wine glasses she'd ordered online, now stacked precariously on my kitchen counter. I'm not even opening them until after we're officially married, you know? She brayed into the phone. It'll feel more official then. Official? The only thing official around here was her impending eviction. I glanced at the neat stack of paperwork spread across my small dining table. My original deed, the notarized documents from Renee, the preliminary closing statements for the sale of the condo, copies of the legal notices sent and ignored, and a printed desk calendar with every key date circled in bold red ink. March 10th, movers. Cleaners. March 11th, closing. Wedding. The grand exit. My exit from this madness, their exit from my property. My hands didn't shake anymore as I reviewed the documents. My body didn't hesitate with fear or uncertainty. There's a strange, cold kind of strength that arrives when you finally, unequivocally realize that nobody is coming to rescue you. Not your son, blinded by a pretty face and his own inadequacies. Not the law unless you wield it yourself. Not even God, it sometimes felt, if you're still praying soft, polite, hopeful prayers. You become your own salvation. You become the rescuer you were waiting for. That afternoon I met Renee at the Daily Grind, our favorite little cafe across town, the one with the slightly wobbly tables but the best dark roast coffee. She was already there when I arrived, tucked into a corner booth, her laptop open, a manila folder resting beside it. "We're all set, Odessa," she said, her smile calm and reassuring as I slid into the seat opposite her. "The buyer's financing cleared without a hitch this morning. They're eager and ready to close on the 11th, 10 a.m. sharp. I've confirmed the movers for the 10th, bright and early. Anything you absolutely want to keep, I suggest you have it boxed and clearly labeled by tomorrow night." "I already did," I said, taking a sip of the water she'd poured for me. "Weeks ago. Everything of value to me is either already at my new apartment or in clearly marked boxes in my bedroom closet." My new apartment. A small, modest one-bedroom across town, but it was mine. Entirely mine. The lease was signed, the deposit paid. "Good girl," Renee said with an approving nod. "Now the legal side is squeaky clean. They were properly served. They willfully ignored the notice to vacate. You've documented every transgression, every communication. We're moving forward completely by the book. They won't have a leg to stand on if they even think about claiming wrongful eviction." I nodded, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over me. Renee slid a crisp, white envelope across the table towards me. "This," she said, tapping the envelope with a perfectly manicured fingernail, is the final letter I'll be sending to them on your behalf. It will go out by courier tomorrow morning, signature required. It confirms the sale of the property. It informs them again that any personal belongings remaining on the premises after 9 a.m. on March 10th will be professionally packed and transported to Seabrook's secure storage facility. It clearly states they will have 60 days to claim said items at their own expense, of course. Perfect, I said. Just perfect. Anne Odessa, Renee said then, her professional mask softening, her voice lowering conspiratorially, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. You absolutely sure you want to show up at that wedding reception? You don't have to, you know. You could just let the legal process unfold and be done with them. I smiled then, a slow, genuine smile that reached my eyes. Renee, my dear friend, I said, I have never been more sure of anything in my entire life. Renee leaned back in the booth, a wide, appreciative grin spreading across her face. Then I'll see you at the closing bright and early on the 11th. And I might just have to clear my schedule for that afternoon. For moral support, of course. Of course, I said, my own grin matching hers. When I got home later that afternoon, the condo was filled with the cloying scent of artificial pine. Kenya was standing precariously on a stepladder in the entryway, attempting to hang a string of faux eucalyptus garland above the doorway. She was humming off-key. Don't worry, she said, not even glancing down at me as I walked in. I'll take it all down before the ceremony. Or maybe not. It's actually pretty cute, right? Adds a touch of rustic chic. Depends entirely on who you ask, I said, walking past her towards my bedroom. Marcus was holed up in the spare bedroom, the one that used to be his office before Kenya decided it would make a better, glam room for her. He was arguing loudly on the phone with someone. His best man, perhaps, judging by the exasperated tone. They were both so utterly consumed by their own impending nuptials, their own dramas, they didn't notice the small, discreetly packed box of my mother's china I carried into my room, or the fact that the antique silver candlesticks were missing from the mantelpiece. They didn't see what was systematically, quietly disappearing from the condo. They only saw what they wanted to see. I removed everything that held even a whisper of importance to me. My personal documents, my treasured keepsakes, my wedding band from Charles, which I'd taken off when Kenya's presence became unbearable but hadn't yet stored away, even the tiny, tarnished silver thimble my grandmother had pressed into my palm when I was a girl learning to sew. One by one, these fragments of my life, my history, vanished from the shared spaces of the condo while Kenya finalized her seating charts and Marcus agonized over writing his wedding vows. The 7th of March came. Then the 8th. Then the 9th. Each day felt like a breath held too long. On the morning of the 10th, I was up before dawn. The moving crew, two polite, strong young men named Travis and Deshawn, arrived at 7:30 a.m. sharp as scheduled. Travis, the head mover, greeted me with a kind smile and asked, "Everything boxed and ready to go, ma'am?" "Yes, it is," I said, leading them to my bedroom. "Just the contents of these 3 closets here and the boxes stacked in the spare room. Please note, the furniture and belongings in the spare room are not mine. So please treat them gently as you remove them, but they do not belong here anymore and are to be taken to the storage unit specified on the work order." They moved with a quiet, respectful efficiency that I deeply appreciated. I'd already paid the substantial deposit for the large, climate-controlled storage unit at Seabrook. I had meticulously labeled every single box. Marcus Johnson, personal items. Kenya, her last name. Clothing. Kenya, her last name. Decorative items. I took photos of the process with my phone, documenting each stage and signed off on their inventory list with a firm hand, receiving a receipt in return. Kenya and Marcus, blissfully unaware, were not home. According to Kenya's incessantly updated Instagram story, they were enjoying a much-needed pre-wedding spa day of pampering and relaxation. The post featured a boomerang video of her champagne glass clinking against his. "Self-care before I say I do," the caption trilled, adorned with multiple ring emojis. By 11:15 a.m. the condo was significantly emptier. Their presence, their clutter, their energy, largely gone. It was clean. Almost peaceful. I stood in the center of my living room and turned in a slow, deliberate circle. No more clashing gold and teal decor. No more piles of bridal magazines. No more scented candles that gave me splitting headaches. Just air. Just space. Just mine. For a few more hours. At precisely noon, the professional cleaning crew I'd hired arrived. 2 women, thorough and no-nonsense. They scrubbed every surface, steam cleaned the carpets until they looked almost new, polished the windows until they gleamed. The condo smelled of lemons and disinfectant, a scent of sterile renewal. I paid them in cash as agreed and tipped them generously. They deserved it. That evening I went to Renee's house. She lived in a charming little bungalow with a sprawling rose garden. She poured me a generous glass of chilled white wine and helped me steam the wrinkles out of my dress for the following evening. It was a navy blue floor-length gown, simple but exquisitely cut, with a high, elegant neckline and a row of tiny pearl buttons down the back. It was the kind of dress you don't wear to blend in. You wear it to be remembered. Regal. Powerful. We rehearsed my lines, my brief speech for the reception, like it was a scene from a particularly satisfying play. You'll walk in once they've cut the cake and are making their toasts, Renee said, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. Make sure everyone, especially the happy couple, sees you clearly. Oh, they'll see me, Renee, I said, a grim little smile playing on my lips. They won't be able to miss me. The envelope with the forwarded invoices, she prompted. Safely tucked in my evening bag, I confirmed, along with a copy of the final notice about the storage unit, and just for good measure, the bill from the cleaning crew. Renee grinned, raising her wine glass in a mock toast. Legendary, Odessa. Absolutely legendary. I slept remarkably well that night for the first time in months. Deeply. Dreamlessly. There was no tension coiling in my stomach. No one banging through cabinets at the crack of dawn or burning bacon and filling the air with smoke. Just blessed, restorative silence. On March 11th, the morning of the wedding, the day of reckoning, I met Renee and the buyers, Andre and Patrice, at 10 a.m. sharp in the sterile, impersonal conference room of the real estate office. Everything was meticulously prepared, all documents in order. The sale was clean, legal, and blessedly final. We signed the stacks of papers, our pens scratching across the pages, sealing the deal. I handed over the keys to my condo, the home I'd lived in for over 30 years, with no hesitation, no flicker of regret. Just a profound sense of release. Congratulations, I told the young couple, offering them a genuine smile. It's a beautiful place. I hope you'll be very happy there. Take good care of it. They beamed, their happiness infectious. We will, Mrs. Johnson, Andre said earnestly. Thank you so much. Patrice pressed a small, beribboned gift basket into my hands. An assortment of gourmet teas and local honey. A sweet, unnecessary gesture. By 10:47 a.m., the condo that had held a lifetime of my memories was no longer mine. And Marcus and Kenya, at that very moment probably arguing about boutonnieres or seating arrangements, still didn't know a thing. That afternoon, as expected, Kenya returned to the now-sold condo with her entire bridal party in tow, bridesmaids, flower girls, her mother, her sister. Laughing, shrieking, sipping champagne from plastic flutes, they descended upon the place like a conquering army, fully intending to transform it into their makeshift glam suite for the wedding preparations. Hair dryers buzzed like angry hornets. Professional photographers clicked away, capturing every contrived moment of bridal bliss. Someone predictably was filming a TikTok video of Kenya, resplendent in a white silk robe with bride, embroidered in rhinestones on the back, dancing awkwardly in front of my, now formerly my, fireplace. I sat in the serene quiet of Renee's sun-drenched living room, already dressed in my navy blue gown, watching it all unfold on Renee's phone. She scrolled with grim fascination through Kenya's relentless Instagram stories, one perfectly sculpted eyebrow raised, the other twitching almost imperceptibly, like she was physically restraining herself from commenting. They really, truly think they're invincible, don't they? Renee said, shaking her head slowly, a mixture of disbelief and admiration in her tone. The sheer, unmitigated gall. They don't think I'm invincible, Renee, I replied calmly, taking a delicate sip of the chamomile tea Renee had brewed for me. They think I'm a doormat. A relic. Invisible. That's the part that makes this whole thing rather amusing in a tragic sort of way. Renee looked over at me then, her sharp eyes assessing. You good, Odessa? Really good. I'm calm, Renee, I said, meeting her gaze. Utterly and completely calm. Which is precisely how I know I'm ready. My hair, expertly coiffed into an elegant chignon by a stylist Renee knew, was set. My pearls, my mother's pearls, rested coolly against my skin. I slipped the thick white envelope into my small beaded clutch, checked the seams of my gown one last time, and exhaled deeply, slowly. My hands didn't tremble. My mind didn't race with last-minute doubts or whats. I'd already lived through the worst of it. The slow, agonizing process of being rendered invisible in my own home, disrespected daily under my own roof. This was merely the closing act. The curtain call. At precisely 5 p.m., as the late afternoon sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows, we pulled up to the grand entrance of the majestic Pines Banquet Hall. The parking lot was already packed with shiny, expensive cars. Through the tinted windows of Renee's sedan, I could already hear the muffled bass thumping from the reception hall within. The DJ was clearly already hard at work, hyping the early arriving crowd. Kenya's voice, sharp, loud, and brimming with overconfidence, echoed faintly from inside as someone opened the main doors. "They're just starting to cut the cake," Renee whispered, having done a quick reconnaissance mission by peeking through the glass doors of the hall. "Perfect timing, Odessa. Make your entrance just as they're feeling their most triumphant." I stepped out of the car slowly, deliberately, smoothing the imaginary wrinkles from the hem of my navy gown. The fabric was heavy, luxurious, the pearls at my neck just cool enough against my skin to remind me that I was very much alive, very much present, and very much in control. Inside, the celebration was in full, ostentatious swing. Gold table runners shimmered under the light of dozens of floating candles. Rose-colored linens draped every table. The chairs, those ridiculous gold Chiavari chairs Kenya had insisted upon, each had a blush pink velvet bow tied to its back. A massive, three-tiered wedding cake, a monument to their self-congratulation, stood like a centerpiece of pride on a lace-covered table, already half-sliced and glistening under the ornate crystal chandelier. Kenya stood at the center of it all, a confection in white lace and tulle, twirling with her bridal bouquet clutched in her hand, her diamond tiara, because of course there was a tiara, sparkling as if she genuinely believed she was royalty. Marcus stood slightly behind her, arrayed in a pristine white tuxedo jacket, clapping along to the music with a wide, manufactured grin, looking like a man already celebrating the comfortable life he thought he'd so cleverly stolen from me. Until they saw me. Heads turned first, like a ripple spreading through the room. Conversations stalled mid-sentence, mid-laugh. Even the pulsating music seemed to soften, to falter, as if the DJ sensed the sudden, palpable shift in the atmosphere, the arrival of an unexpected and perhaps unwelcome guest. I walked calmly, deliberately, down the center aisle created between the round linen-draped tables, my low heels clicking a steady rhythmic beat on the polished ballroom floor. Some people gasped audibly. A few of the women from my church, scattered amongst the guests, covered their mouths with their hands, their eyes wide. A distant cousin of Marcus's, someone I hadn't seen in years, blinked hard several times, as if she couldn't quite believe I'd had the audacity to show up. But the older women in the room, the matriarchs, the ones who'd seen a thing or two in their lifetimes, they just nodded slowly, some with a flicker of sympathy in their eyes, others with a glint of knowing, almost fierce pride. They understood. They knew what was coming. I reached the head table, a long, elaborately decorated affair, and stood directly in front of Marcus and Kenya. She blinked rapidly, her perfectly glossed lips parted in a silent of surprise. Marcus's eyes, wide and suddenly fearful, darted towards the side exit as if he were contemplating a desperate escape. Kenya, recovering quickly, crossed her arms over her chest, her chin jutting out belligerently. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice a forced, brittle attempt at a laugh. "You weren't invited. This is a private event." I didn't answer her. I didn't even look at her. My gaze was fixed on my son. He looked down at his shoes, unable to meet my eyes. I reached into my small, elegant clutch and pulled out the thick, white envelope. The weight of justice, of karma, of vindication felt substantial in my hand. I placed it neatly, precisely on the white linen tablecloth, directly between their half-empty champagne glasses. "Since y'all were so comfortable using my address for every single aspect of this wedding," I said, my voice clear, calm, and carrying easily through the suddenly silent hall, loud enough for everyone to hear, all the invoices were naturally delivered to me. So I went ahead and thoughtfully forwarded the bills from the caterer, the florist, the band, and, of course, the rather substantial cleaning bill for the condo. Also, And here my voice dropped just a fraction, taking on a steely edge. Just so there's absolutely no confusion going forward, I sold the condo this morning. The keys were handed over to the new owners at 10:47 a.m. It is no longer your home to return to. A hush so profound it was almost deafening fell across the entire ballroom. A silver fork, dropped by a nerveless hand, clattered loudly onto a china plate. Kenya's sister, seated next to her, let out a small, strangled gasp. Someone's champagne glass tipped over, its contents spreading like a pale stain on the pristine tablecloth. One of the groomsmen coughed, a short, awkward, explosive sound. Even the DJ, bless his professional instincts, stopped the music completely. Dead silence. Kenya's carefully made-up face tightened, the mask of bridal bliss cracking to reveal the fury beneath. You what?" she finally managed to sputter, her voice incredulous. "You heard me, dear," I said, my tone devoid of any inflection. Her voice rose then, shrill and cracking, losing its cultivated composure. "You can't do that. That place was supposed to be mine," I said, finishing her sentence for her. "It was mine. Legally. Undisputedly. Until this morning." Marcus stepped forward slightly then, his hand outstretched in a placating gesture, his face a mask of panic. "Ma, please. Not here. Not now." I turned my gaze to the assembled crowd, the sea of stunned, curious faces. I allowed a small, smooth, unbothered smile to touch my lips. "Enjoy the cake, everyone," I said, my voice resonating with a calm authority. "After all, you lovely people paid for it." Then I turned on my heel. And I walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't rush. I bestowed upon them the parting gift of watching me leave entirely on my own terms, head held high. Outside, in the cool evening air, Renee was waiting patiently in the car, the engine already running. She reached across and opened the passenger door for me with a flourish. "Well?" she asked, though her eyes, sparkling with a mixture of triumph and amusement, already knew the answer. "How did it go, Odessa?" "Better than church, Renee," I said, settling into the comfortable leather seat. "Much, much better than church." As we pulled away from the curb, I saw a flurry of activity through the banquet hall's large windows. Someone inside had grabbed their phone and was clearly filming the chaotic aftermath. The whispers, I imagined, had now turned into a dull, shocked hum. A few folks had stood up and were leaning over the tables, no doubt craning their necks for a better view of the imploding head table. I could only imagine that the rest of the reception was awkward at best, utterly explosive at worst. We drove in a comfortable silence for a while. Renee, wise woman that she was, didn't ask intrusive questions. I didn't offer a blow-by-blow commentary. I just watched the last vestiges of the sun melt down into the dark silhouettes of the trees, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over me, cleaner and lighter than I'd felt in years. That night, back in the quiet solitude of my new small apartment, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't even bother to take off my pearls. My phone, which I'd left on the kitchen counter, buzzed intermittently. I ignored it. But later, much later, just out of a lingering sense of curiosity, I picked it up and scrolled through Facebook. And there was. Of course it was. A grainy, shaky video, clearly filmed on a cell phone by someone in the back corner of the reception hall. It had caught the exact moment I placed the white envelope on the table. You could barely hear my voice over the ambient noise, but the caption, typed in bold capital letters, told the entire story. This woman just absolutely ruined her son's wedding and completely destroyed the bride with literally 2 sentences. Mic drop. Hashtag mother of the groom, hashtag reclaim your throne, hashtag karma. The comments, even in the short time since it had been posted, were already flying thick and fast. Some, predictably, called me bitter, petty, vindictive. A monster. Others, just as predictably, called me brilliant, a hero, an icon. A legend. Someone actually suggested I deserved jail time for emotional distress. Another commenter offered to send me a bouquet of flowers. But one woman, a stranger with a kind face in her profile picture, wrote something that made me freeze, then read again, then smile, a slow, deep smile that started in my heart. If you raise a son who allows his mother to be disrespected, who forgets who fed him, clothed him, sheltered him, and loved him unconditionally, then reminding him, however publicly, isn't revenge. It's not pettiness. It's restoration. It's a mother reclaiming her dignity. I screenshotted her comment. Saved it to my phone's favorites. Then I turned off the phone completely. I sat there in the comfortable quiet of my own space. And I smiled. Really smiled. I didn't hear from Marcus the day after the wedding. Or the day after that. Or even the day after that. I wasn't surprised. Shame, I knew, could be a powerful silencer. By the third day, however, my phone began to buzz with a relentless, annoying constancy. Calls from unknown numbers, calls from blocked IDs, even a sputtering, indignant voicemail from someone claiming to be Kenya's second cousin Thelma, demanding to know if I was finally done being so damn dramatic and cruel. I deleted it without listening to the rest. I wasn't in the mood, nor did I feel any obligation, to explain the concept of earned peace to people who had never bothered to cultivate it themselves. I spent that weekend, the first truly peaceful weekend I'd had in months, with my dear friends from church. Sister Geneva brought over her famous sweet potato pie, still warm from the oven. Sister Joy, ever practical, brought folding chairs and a portable Bluetooth speaker. We set up on the small balcony of my new apartment, played old gospel records from the Clark sisters and Mahalia Jackson, shared stories and laughed like giddy teenagers. Someone, I think it was Sister Hattie, eventually asked what it really felt like walking into that reception knowing what I was about to do. I told them the unvarnished truth. It felt, I said, taking a slow sip of my lemonade, like I was finally stepping out of a coffin I hadn't even realized I'd been buried alive in for months. They clapped then, a soft, supportive round of applause. Sister Joy raised her glass of lemonade high in a toast and said with a wide grin, "To the Book of Odessa, Chapter 2, the Resurrection." I didn't correct her. In many ways she was right. On Sunday morning, I put on my best charcoal gray suit, the one with the pearl buttons, and walked into the early service at Greater Hope Baptist like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But word, especially scandalous word, travels fast in a church community. I could feel the curious stares, the not-so-subtle whispers. A few folks, the ones who probably thought I'd gone too far, looked away pointedly when I caught their eye. But many others, especially the older sisters, smiled at me with a newfound solidarity, a glint of shared understanding in their eyes. One sister, a quiet woman named Ethel who rarely spoke, leaned in as I passed her pew and whispered, her voice warm with admiration, "You did what I never had the guts to do with my no-good son-in-law. God bless you, Odessa." That night, after a simple dinner of leftover pie and a cup of tea, I finally steeled myself and listened to the voicemails that had accumulated on my phone. Marcus had left 5. I didn't particularly need to hear them, but a part of me, the part that was still a mother, wanted to know what kind of man he thought he was now, after the public unraveling of his carefully constructed charade. The first voicemail was frantic, breathless, tinged with an almost hysterical disbelief. Ma, why would you do this to us? To me. You embarrassed us. In front of everyone. Our families, our friends. How could you be so cruel? The second was quieter, the anger replaced by a plaintive, wounded tone. I just wanted to start fresh, Ma. So, a new life. I didn't think you'd take it this far. It was just a place to stay for a bit. By the third voicemail, left much later that night, his voice cracked, raw with a dawning, desperate realization. She left, Ma. Kenya. She packed up all her stuff from the hotel this morning. Said I ruined everything. Said I was a mama's boy who couldn't even protect our future. There was the inevitable fallout. By the fifth and final voicemail, left sometime in the pre-dawn hours, his voice was barely a whisper, hollowed out, defeated. I don't know where to go, Ma. I don't know what to do. I didn't call back. Some lessons I knew had to be learned in the stark, uncomfortable silence of one's own consequences. But on Tuesday morning, 2 days later, I heard a hesitant knock at my new apartment door. 3 soft, tentative taps, spaced out unevenly, like the sound of someone who wasn't entirely sure they were welcome, or even at the right address. I looked through the peephole. It was Marcus. He looked smaller. Not physically, of course, but in spirit. Deflated. Like a child's birthday balloon someone had let all the air out of, leaving behind a wrinkled, pathetic shell. He stood there in the hallway under the harsh fluorescent light, wearing a rumpled shirt I didn't recognize, no wedding band on his left hand, holding nothing but a single folded piece of what looked like hotel stationery in his hand. I opened the door just a crack at first, then wider, but I didn't invite him in. I simply stood there, blocking the entrance with my body. "Hi, Ma," he said, his voice hoarse, raspy, as if he'd been doing a lot of shouting or perhaps a lot of crying. I nodded, my expression carefully neutral. "Marcus." He shifted his weight uncomfortably from one foot to the other. His eyes, red-rimmed and shadowed, darted around the unfamiliar hallway, then back to my face. Can I come in? Just for a minute." "No," my voice was quiet but firm. Unyielding. He blinked, a flicker of surprise, then resignation passing across his face. "Okay." He swallowed hard. "Right." We stood there in the sterile hallway for a long, awkward moment, the only sound the faint, incessant buzzing of the overhead fluorescent light fixture. He looked around again, up and down the hallway, as if he wasn't quite sure where he was or how he'd gotten there. "She left," he said again, redundantly, as if the words themselves were a source of continued astonishment to him. "Kenya. She's really gone." "I heard," I said, my tone giving nothing away. She said I should have stood up to you more. That I was weak for letting you dictate things." I waited. He didn't deny her assessment. He couldn't. "I told her you'd come around eventually," he mumbled, staring at his worn sneakers. "That you were just upset, but you'd never actually go through with selling the place. That it was all a bluff." I raised my eyebrows slightly. "That, Marcus," I said, my voice still quiet but now edged with a sliver of ice, "was your first and perhaps your most significant mistake. Thinking I was bluffing. Thinking I didn't mean what I said." He looked up at the floor, shame coloring his neck. I didn't come here to fight, Ma." "Then why are you here, Marcus?" I asked, my gaze unwavering. He hesitated, the folded piece of paper trembling slightly in his hand. To say I'm sorry." "Sorry for what, specifically?" I pressed. I needed to hear the words. I deserved to hear them. He took a shaky breath. For everything. For treating you like a burden. For letting Kenya take over your space, your life. For not protecting you. For not being a better son." I let those words hang in the air between us, heavy and overdue. He looked up again, his eyes pleading. I really thought I was building something new, something good. But I see now. I see I built it all on sand. I used your foundation, Ma, the foundation you and Dad built, and I acted like it was mine to do with as I pleased. I disrespected it. I disrespected you." I crossed my arms over my chest. "You didn't just use it, Marcus. You tried to erase it. You tried to make me disappear in my own home, in my own life." "I know," he said softly, his voice thick with unshed tears. "God, Ma, I know that now. And I am so sorry." We stood there for another long, charged moment, both of us rooted in a silence that had taken decades and a world of hurt to grow between us. He began again, his voice catching, breaking. "I didn't mean to lose everything. I didn't mean for it to end up like this." I looked at him then, a long, hard, searching look. And for a fleeting second, I saw not the man who had wounded me so deeply, but the little boy I had once held in my arms, the boy whose scraped knees I had kissed better, whose nightmares I had chased away. But that boy was long gone. And this man, this broken man standing before me, had made his choices. I stepped forward then, not to hug him, not to offer comfort, but to place a firm hand on the doorframe, a symbolic barrier. "When you treat your mother like a piece of old, unwanted furniture, Marcus," I said, my voice gentle now, but imbued with an undeniable finality, "you should not be surprised when she eventually decides to move herself." His shoulders, already slumped, seemed to sink even further. His eyes glassed over, but he didn't cry. He just stood there, absorbing the weight of my words, the weight of his actions. Can I see you again sometime, Ma?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Maybe get a coffee? Talk." I didn't answer him right away. I looked past him down the long, empty hallway. Then quietly I said, "We'll see, Marcus. We'll see." And with that I closed the door. Not with anger. Not with a dramatic slam. Just a quiet, decisive click. The sound of a chapter ending. I leaned against the solid wood of the door for a moment and breathed. A deep, cleansing breath. Behind that door, in that small, simple act of closing it, I had reclaimed my name. My space. My dignity. My peace. I walked back into my sunlit living room, made myself another cup of strong hot tea and opened the window wide. The breeze that came through smelled like fresh jasmine from a neighbor's garden and the promise of old rain. I sat down in my comfortable armchair, the one no one had touched, the one no one had thrown out or dared to replace with an inferior velvet substitute. And I looked around at my new apartment. Not grand, not luxurious, but it was mine. Every square inch of it. Filled with my things, my memories, my peace. On the small bookshelf in the corner, the plain brown accordion file I had kept so diligently through it all still Saturday, when they forget who I am, the label read, still neatly intact. I picked it up, held it in my hands for a moment, feeling its weight. I opened it one last time, flipped through the pages filled with my careful, angry, heartbroken notes. Then, with a sense of profound release, I tore it in half. And then in half again. And again until it was nothing but a pile of meaningless scraps. I dropped them into the wastepaper basket, as I remembered who I was. And that, I finally understood, was more than enough.